Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Jiggers' Place. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I'm here every other Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific time. And I'm kind of in the dark. Hold on one second. Let's try this. There you go. What a wondrous thing is light. So, if I sound a little strange, yes, that is the case. I've been sick for the last week and a half or so, but you know what? Couldn't give up the opportunity to be at Jiggers' Place this afternoon. It's really evening. It's, you know, the sun is going down. As I mentioned, I think last week, this is my favorite time of the year. So on today's show, I'm going to be talking about, I think it's a fraught subject these days, responsibilities, rights, and entitlements. And it's a bit of an extension from the show I did on language inflation, where one of the words I pointed out, I believe, was deserve. How many times do we hear, especially in advertisements, about all the things that we deserve? I'm not sure, no, strike that. I am sure we don't deserve anything like the number of things that advertisers would like us to believe that we deserve. And so I think we need to give due consideration to this idea of responsibilities, rights, and entitlements. So in honor of that, my cocktail collaborator and I came up with a cocktail called the Weight of Responsibility. So this is a gin-based cocktail, and I'm going to be using my bar gin, which is Tangray, and let's see, what else are we going to use here? This beautiful reddish pink liqueur known as Aperol, famous for the Aperol spritzer, which is the recipe for which is right on the back of the bottle. And it's an aperitivo all the way back from 1919, just post World War I. Okay, and then I've got some fresh squeezed grapefruit juice. I just made that a little while ago. Some fresh squeezed lemon juice, just a dab of simple syrup, and club soda. And then, oh, here it is. I've never used this before. This is activated charcoal. So this is going to be an experiment. This is by far the most complicated cocktail I've made on Jiggers' Place. We'll see how it works out. Oh my gosh, I realized I didn't get my ice. Okay, so give me 30 seconds. So sorry about the interruption. There's a Yiddish word called vermischt, which is what you get when you're kind of sick and confused, and I'm definitely a little vermischt here. Okay, all right, so we've got ice in the shaker, we've got ice in the highball glass. We're going to start out with 3/4 of an ounce of Aperol. And let's see, here's my cup. And where are they going to be? They're going to be on the last side that I looked. Yeah, there we go. Okay, there we go. And then 3/4 of, a full ounce of gin. There we go. Okay, got that. And then we're going to go with 3/4 of an ounce of the grapefruit juice. The light here is really tough. I don't know why I'm having so much problems here. There we go. Okay. Okay. And 1/4 of an ounce of, half an ounce of fresh lemon juice. Nothing like fresh juices. I know I don't always have them, but and then 1/4 ounce of simple syrup. So I'm just going to kind of squeeze that in. Probably a little bit too much, but that's okay. And we're going to shake this up. So grapefruit juice. I use what I could find here in the winter. A pink grapefruit. I have a grapefruit tree in my backyard. I've actually never eaten the grapefruit off of it, even though I love grapefruit. So silly me. So this is getting iced down nicely. Some of the water's melting, opening up the flavors. Okay, and now, come on. There we go. Okay, we're going to strain this into a highball glass. Oh, the color is beautiful. And now we're going to take a bar spoon and pour the club soda over the back of the bar spoon so that it will layer on top. Or hopefully it's going to layer on top. Yep, it kind of does. There we go. Okay, so we got our, and let me show this to you so you can kind of see that see how it's light on top and darker on the bottom? That's the layering effect of the cocktail. That's what we're after. Okay, now I'm going to take the activated charcoal and let it kind of dribble. It's supposed to dribble down and make streaks. So let's see if this works. Okay. And if you can see, I'll show this to you, you can see it's starting to make its way down the glass, and it's kind of, you see how it's streaky? That's supposed to be the weightiness of responsibilities, right? Okay, so let's give this a taste, right? Very nice. Perfect for a sore throat. I'll see you on the couch.
So here we are at Jiggers' place after oh boy, it's been a week. That's what I'll tell you. It's been a week. This is tasty. When one of your most important clients says to you, instead of taking our phone call, why aren't you resting? You're in trouble, right? Yes. Well, that's life, right? And that's what all the people say. Thank you, Frank Sinatra. Okay. So, what is this thing, or what are these things called responsibilities, rights, and entitlements? We hear at least the latter two quite frequently. Less so, I think, the first one, responsibilities. And yet, there was a time in this country when responsibilities really were considered at least as important as rights. And the idea of entitlements really hadn't come up. So, entitlements is a rather contemporary phenomenon, at least from a political standpoint, and even from a social standpoint. We think now about how children are entitled to a childhood, but workhouses existed in England into the 19th century, well into the 19th century. That's what Charles Dickens was writing about in Oliver Twist. And this idea that children should have a childhood is also, for the most part, a 20th century and beyond ideal. So let's start by defining what these things are. So responsibilities are obligations or duties that we as individuals owe to a person, a community, a company, a nation, right? And to my mind, the other two cannot exist if people do not take their responsibilities seriously. Okay? We'll talk more about that as the show progresses. Rights are, I've got my notes here. So rights are freedoms or privileges that we enjoy, or we have, I think, and I'm using enjoy in the sense of the 18th century word, that we have as human beings, okay, or as citizens of a country. So, quoting the Declaration of Independence, we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And those rights are they're what were called, still are in some areas, called natural rights, meaning every human being, no matter where they are, has a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, so here in the United States, we have rights beyond those natural rights that are granted to us by the Constitution. We have the Bill of Rights, and we have the Federal Bill of Rights, I should say, and we have the state, and each state typically has a constitution with, in many cases, a Bill of Rights. Okay, and then there's entitlements. So entitlements are kind of privileges, if you will, to which that someone receives because they are part of a particular group, and either the characteristics and situation of the members of that group mean that a government or a business has given them a benefit, hence the word entitlement, or they have earned it. Okay, so for earned, we can use that term more strictly or loosely depending on the context. Okay, so someone who serves honorably in the United States military, or I should say someone who serves not dishonorably in the United States military for 20 years is entitled to a pension. Okay? So everyone has responsibilities. Everyone has certain rights. However, it is possible for some people to lose their rights in certain circumstances. So I'll give you an example. People over the age of 18 have the right to vote, okay, in both state and federal elections. But at the federal level, a convicted felon, okay, I shouldn't say all felonies. I think it's certain felonies deprive the person of the right to vote. Okay, so a convicted murderer loses the right to vote. Okay, and okay, okay, and then only particular groups are entitled to entitlements. Now, let's talk about the interaction of these. So I mentioned in the beginning, responsibilities are in many ways the precursors of rights. So if we as citizens of the United States do not take our responsibilities seriously, so then we may sacrifice or lose our rights or make them functionally immaterial. Okay, so if we do not take seriously the responsibility to vote, but to vote based on understanding the issues at stake, the qualifications of the candidates, okay, so then if things work out other than the way we want them to, if we haven't fulfilled our responsibility as a voter, frankly, our complaints don't mean a whole lot, right? Because we haven't fulfilled our responsibilities, right? So I have a friend who has never voted in any election, okay? And he started complaining about something going on in the country. This is a while back. And I observed to him, "You've never ever voted. Why should I listen to your complaint?" He said, "Well, I'm a citizen." I said, "Well, that's true. Yes, you are. And this affects me." "Yes, it does. And I have my rights." "You surely do." He said, "So that's why I'm complaining." I said, "Well, fine, but I'm going to discount your complaint because you didn't fulfill your responsibility." And I think a lot of us, if we sat down and thought about it, would view it the same way. Right? So the two go hand in glove. Right? Now, we also have a responsibility to obey the laws in our country. Now, the responsibility is to obey the laws, not to obey the laws that we like. And if we don't like a law, we still have to obey it. However, we have the right to try and change the law. Okay? So, and that's how our system works. By the way, this is not political. This is just the way a constitutional republic operates. And by the way, we live in a republic. Okay, we do not live in a democracy. There are certain more small d democratic aspects of our political system, but our country is a republic because almost all our laws are created by representatives that we elect. That is the hallmark of a republic. In a democracy, okay, we would vote on every issue that came before the body politic, or on every issue that impacted the body politic. Okay. All right. Okay. So when we neglect our responsibilities, number one, we at least potentially put our rights in jeopardy. And number two, we can't really appreciate those rights in the same way that it's harder for a child to appreciate something that's given to the child just as a flat out gift, as opposed to something the child earns. And we both know there's a difference between the two of those, right? So when we work and earn the money and go and buy something for ourselves, that's a much more satisfying experience, at least for most of us, than to just be given stuff. And we have a much greater appreciation for that thing because we know the hard work it took to get it. Right? And this is where entitlements come into play. So rights and entitlements are not the same thing, although they're being increasingly conflated. Okay. So a right is something that applies to virtually universally. As I mentioned before, there are a few contexts or situations in which someone may forfeit a right, but in general, rights are universal. Okay? Entitlements are not. So, for example, Social Security is an entitlement. Okay? And we may think that it's an entitlement for everyone over a certain age, 63, 65, whatever there are various ages at which someone qualifies to start getting Social Security payments. But the reality is, one is only entitled to Social Security payments once they reach the age at which they can take them. If they have paid a certain amount of what's called FICA, Federal Insurance Contributory Act, or something like that, taxes, over a certain period of time. And if someone has not done that, they're not entitled to Social Security, even if they're 65 years old. Now, more and more, we hear about all the things that people have a right to, even if by at least quasi granting them that right, they harm themselves, they create harm, even danger in their communities. Okay. So there's a big debate about homeless people, or what we used to call vagrants. And in some cities, they've been granted the right, or the entitlement, or the right to live in public parks. Right? That never would have passed muster half a century ago. Okay. And indeed, there is a concurrent responsibility to public parks, and that is to use them in a way that does not hamper their use by other members of the community. So by saying that homeless people have a right to live in public parks. What we're saying is they have the right, but they have a right, but they don't have a concurrent responsibility, because oftentimes their living there creates conditions that make the parks unusable for example, children. Okay. This is why rights, responsibilities, and entitlements all have to work in concert. And while I wouldn't go so far as to say they have to balance each other out, because that's an almost impossible equation to make, responsibilities have to come first. Okay. Indeed, I would argue that society is being irresponsible in letting people who are mentally ill, which is a significant proportion of homeless people. Society's being irresponsible by allowing them to live on the streets, where especially women can become prey to sexual predators, where people are exposed to the elements, cold, wet, rain, vermin. Okay. So we have a responsibility as members of a community to see to it that members of our community who are unable to care for themselves nonetheless are taken care of. Okay. Now, that responsibility shows up nowhere in any law book, and a lot of our responsibilities don't show up in any law book, but nonetheless, they're there. They are an extension of the moral foundation on which our society is built. Okay. Now, you'll notice, by the way, governments don't really have responsibilities. Okay. They have duties that they're obligated to perform under the law. But governments are not moral entities. Governments take on the sort of quasi moral foundation of the individuals that make up that community. But the moral responsibility rests with the members of the community, not with the government. And this has been, I think, a problem in our society as well, is we've tried to shift our responsibilities onto government entities. And it doesn't work, because that's not their job. And we can't make it their job. And indeed, we cannot appoint someone to carry out our responsibilities and presume that they're going to do so according to our individual moral code. And an attempt to do that is doomed to failure. Okay. So there are different contexts, shall we say, in which we have to consider our responsibilities and our rights. Pardon me. So there is the private and the public sphere. And our responsibilities in the private sphere are different than those in the public sphere. And this too, I think, causes a lot of problems, because people want to extend into the public sphere our private rights, and it just doesn't work out. Okay. So I, as an individual, I have a responsibility to see to it that my family and my friends are taken care of. Now, if each of us, and I should say my family, my friends, my neighbors, if each of us took that responsibility seriously, there would be a lot less homelessness. Okay. Now, I acknowledge it's very, very difficult if someone has a family member, for example, who's suffering from schizophrenia, which is a mental illness that plagues a number of homeless people. It's very, very hard to deal with that person. That doesn't mean we can shirk our responsibility. Okay. We still have to exercise it. We may need to secure help from friends, families, professionals. Okay. But shirking the responsibility and insisting that the community take care of that person, okay, that is morally unsound. Now you might say, well, I can't afford to do that. Okay, that's a legitimate concern. Right? And there are programs around to help with that. Okay. So the responsibility is to see that care is rendered, but it may involve enlisting, local resources that go beyond your family in order to accomplish that goal. Okay. And so our private obligations are different. In many ways, there is no public obligation per se. Okay. Public obligations are only the sum total of private obligations that affect the larger community. Okay. So again, the responsibility to vote, that's a public obligation because it affects the broader community. Okay. Whereas taking care of our family members, our neighbors, okay, that most directly affects those individuals. And that's the distinction between public and private, I would argue. Okay. Nonetheless, we cannot shirk our responsibilities in either realm. Pardon me. Okay. Now, there are also responsibilities in the workplace. Okay. We have to fulfill our responsibilities in our job. Okay. So we need to consider what are our responsibilities in the various realms that we inhabit, and how are we going to fulfill those responsibilities. Okay. I'll give you an example. I'm in a situation right now that's become increasingly difficult. And it involves a client of my sister Marla, who is a therapist. And this particular client has gotten into a real financial mess. And my sister Marla doesn't have the expertise and the experience to deal with it. So she asked me to help her. Right? This is Marla taking responsibility for a member of her community. And this is me fulfilling my responsibility as the member of a family. And, it's been a lot of work. And candidly, the only thing I get out of it is the knowledge of knowing that I fulfilled my responsibility to my family. That's just the way it is. And normally I would get paid for doing what I'm doing, but not in this case. And the fact that I'm not getting paid is immaterial. I still have a responsibility to fill. Okay? Now, is the person that I'm seeking to help Does the person have a right to my help? No. Is the person entitled to my help? No. Okay. But the person is part of kind of my larger community in the sense that this is someone important to my sister. And so she does have a call on me, for want of a better way of putting it. And I have a responsibility to do my best to help with the situation. Okay? And I was talking to a friend of this person who I consider to be in a position to help in certain ways. And this person is very torn because this person views certain risks to her own well-being if she were to accept the responsibility I suggested she should accept. She cares about this person. She's been a good friend of this person for a long time. And yet, what is her responsibility? Is she required to sacrifice her own well-being for the sake of this person? No, I don't think so. Is she required to suffer some discomfort for the sake of this person? Yes, I think so. And somewhere in the middle of well-being and discomfort, wherever that is, here, I don't know, that's where, she can draw the line. That's where we can all draw the line. Excuse me. Okay. So I want to talk about entitlements now. There are far more legal entitlements in our society today than there's ever been before. And even the word entitlement, I think, is problematic because an entitlement makes it sound like a person is deserving of this for no other reason than they're deserving of it. Okay? And that's a problem. Let's look at something like what are called SNAP benefits. So this is what used to be known as food stamps. So we as a society, for good or for bad, have decided that we want to subsidize a certain level of nutritional security, for want of a better word. Okay. Now, here's the interesting thing. There are all kinds of things that a SNAP beneficiary can buy that have little, if any, nutritional value. And I would argue that since SNAP, which means supplemental nutritional something or other program, is for nutritional purposes, someone who is a SNAP beneficiary has a responsibility to use it for buying nutrition, as opposed to, I don't know, soda pop, which has no nutritional value. Now, don't get me wrong. Soda pop is delicious. I don't drink it very often anymore, but there was a time when I dearly loved my Coca-Cola. I get it, okay? But let's be honest, there's no nutritional value to Coca-Cola or any other kind of soda pop. There's no nutritional value in candy. There's an emotional value to it because we like it and it gives us pleasure. And I'm not denying that that's the case. But the point of the entitlement is to see to it that people can live healthy lives, right? So what gets lost in discussions of entitlements is the concurrent responsibility that attends or attaches, I should say, to the recipient of the entitlement. right? Again, all of these work in concert with each other. And if they don't, that's when the system starts to break down. Okay? I don't think there's very many people in this country. I won't say there's none, because there's always crazy people out there that want, people to starve. Okay? But I think that to the extent that we are, as a society, helping people out who, through unfortunate circumstances or whatever, aren't able to afford to buy themselves sufficient food, I think that we can expect that, the support we're giving is being used as beneficially as possible. Right? I don't think a lot of people would disagree with that either. If we sort of pushed all the, political blather aside, and we just sat here over a cocktail, as we do here at Jiggers Place, and talked about values and being a part of a community and all of that. Food for thought. So, as we head into the holiday season, we think about the year to come, we gather with friends and family, which these days seem to so often be fraught with conflict, especially over politics. Maybe instead of getting bogged down in those kind of destructive conversations, maybe let's talk about responsibilities and rights and entitlements, and how they're supposed to work in concert, how they should bind us together as a society, and search for those aspects on which the vast majority of us can agree. And maybe in that way, we can aspire to the spirit of this time of year. And I'm speaking of as a Jewish guy, I'm speaking of the spirit of Christmas, right? Peace on earth, goodwill toward men. This is the time of year when we should be thinking about that. And rather than looking for ways to get into arguments or dispute or prove somebody else wrong, let's look for ways that we can agree with one another. Let's look for ways we can build up that foundation on which our society rests. And in so doing, really infuse ourselves with the spirit of the season. And I think if we do, then indeed we will have a very, very happy new year. So I thank you very much for joining me. As always, it's my favorite time of the every 2-week period here at Jiggers Place. And I wish you a wonderful evening, a wonderful rest of the week, and a restorative weekend. I'm hoping to have one myself. And look forward to seeing you next week. Marie, darling, you are my bell. Courage at all times, my friends.